There's a type of person who spends their weekends alone, in a garage, covered in grease, talking to a machine that hasn't run in 30 years. They're not fixing a motorcycle. They just don't know that yet. On the surface, this looks like a hobby, maybe even an obsession, a collection of old parts, manuals from another era, hours spent chasing down a carburetor that no longer exists. But here's what's actually happening in that garage. Someone is trying to put something back together, and the motorcycle, the chrome, the rust, the engine that stutters and refuses, the motorcycle is just the object they chose to make that need visible. Because some people don't restore motorcycles. They restore themselves. When a person starts working on a classic motorcycle, something happens to their mind that almost no other activity can replicate. They enter a space where every problem has an answer, where cause and effect are honest, where if you do the right thing in the right order, something dead becomes alive again. Psychologists call this a state of high cognitive engagement, but that phrase doesn't capture what it actually feels like. What it actually feels like is this. For the first time in a long time, the world makes sense. The architecture of your thinking begins to shift. You stop processing life in abstractions, in anxiety, in future catastrophe, in unresolved conversations, and you start processing it in sequences. Step 1. Step 2. Problem identified, problem solved. This is a recalibration of the mind, a kind of factory reset that doesn't erase who you are. It's like it reminds you. And the people who keep coming back to that garage every weekend, every spare hour, they're not there for the motorcycle. They're there for that feeling of being a mind that works. Let's go deeper. There's a concept in psychology called locus of control. It describes where a person believes the power over their life actually lives. People with an external locus of control feel like life happens to them. Like circumstances, other people, random events are the authors of their story. People with an internal locus of control feel like they are, at least in part, the ones who steer. Now here's what's fascinating. Research consistently shows that interacting with mechanical systems, especially repairing them, actively shifts your locus of control inward. When you take a broken thing and make it work, your brain records that event as evidence. Evidence that your decisions matter, that your hands can change outcomes, that the gap between broken and whole is a gap you have the power to close. Do this enough times and your brain starts applying that logic everywhere. To relationships, to career decisions, to the way you handle uncertainty. The motorcycle becomes a training ground for a psychological skill that has nothing to do with motorcycles. There's also something else at play, attentional architecture. We live in an era of fragmented attention. Notifications, feeds, the constant low hum of things that demand a piece of us. Our capacity for deep focus, for being truly present inside a single task, is quietly eroding for most people. But the person in the garage restoring a 1972 engine doesn't have that problem. They cannot be distracted. Not because they're disciplined, because the work doesn't allow it. One wrong move, one moment of being somewhere else mentally, and something breaks or stays broken. The restoration process is one of the last environments in modern life that enforces full presence. And full presence, genuine, embodied, focused presence, is what psychologists now understand to be one of the most powerful states a human mind can enter. Some people pay for it in therapy. Some find it in meditation. Some people find it in a garage covered in grease with a carburetor that still won't cooperate. What kind of person emerges from years of this? Not the stereotype, not the leather jacket, the rebellion, the noise. Something quieter, and actually more interesting. Independence. Not the performative kind, but the structural kind. A person who has learned through repetition that they can figure things out, that the answer exists somewhere, and they are capable of finding it. This isn't arrogance, it's the opposite. It's a calm, tested confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. Tolerance for ambiguity. A machine that doesn't run could have 20 different problems. The person who restores motorcycles learns to sit inside uncertainty without collapsing. to work the problem without needing to know the answer first. This is an extraordinarily rare cognitive skill, and almost every high-functioning human being you've ever admired has a version of it. Risk calibration. Here's something the psychology of motorcycles teaches that almost nothing else does. The difference between perceived risk and actual risk. When you understand a machine, when you've taken it apart and rebuilt it, the fear changes. You stop reacting to how dangerous something looks and start assessing how dangerous it actually is. This translates. People who ride and restore motorcycles tend to make better decisions under pressure because their nervous system has learned to stay functional when the stakes feel high. And then there's something harder to name, a kind of seriousness about life. A person who has learned that things break, that time erodes everything, that nothing lasts without attention, without care, without work, and that this isn't a tragedy, it's just the terms of being alive. But we haven't talked about the part that actually keeps people coming back. It's not the engineering, it's not even the psychology, it's the memory. Classic motorcycles exist at a strange intersection of time. They carry other lives inside them. The last owner, the decade they were built in, the roads they've already traveled. When you restore one, you're not just working on metal and rubber, you're in a kind of dialogue with the past. For many people, that's deeply personal. Maybe it's a father's bike, a grandfather's. Maybe it's a machine from the era they were born in, or the era they wish they'd lived through. Maybe it's something more abstract, a feeling that this object represents a version of the world that was slower, more tangible, more honest. There's a word in Japanese, mono no aware, that describes the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, the beauty of things precisely because they fade. Restoring a classic motorcycle is one of the purest expressions of that feeling in practical human activity. You are holding something back from disappearing. You are saying, this still matters, this still has time. And when the engine finally starts, after weeks, sometimes months, there's a moment that people who've experienced it describe in almost identical terms. It's not excitement, it's something quieter, like a conversation that was interrupted decades ago, suddenly continuing. Here's where I want to push a little further. Because the person in the garage isn't just building a motorcycle, they're constructing an argument against disposability, against the idea that when something gets old or difficult, you replace it, against the cultural logic that says newness equals value and complexity equals inconvenience. The person who restores a classic motorcycle is making a different bet. They're betting that understanding something deeply is worth more than owning something easily. That investment creates meaning in a way that acquisition never can. This is fundamentally a philosophy, and it shows up everywhere in how these people live. In their relationships, they tend to repair rather than abandon. In their work, they tend to understand rather than outsource. In their inner life, they tend to examine rather than suppress. They've learned from the machine that the hard way and the right way are often the same road. That patience is not passivity, it's precision delayed. That the things worth having are the things that make you earn them. If something in this video felt less like a description of motorcycles and more like a description of you, that's not an accident. This channel is built for people who think in these patterns, who want to understand why certain minds work the way they do, who are more interested in the psychology underneath the surface than the surface itself. If that's you, you already know what to do. The subscribe button is there for exactly this kind of person. We live in a world that constantly tells us to move faster, to upgrade, to let go of the old and reach for the new. And maybe that's right, sometimes. But there are people who push back, quietly, in garages, on weekends, with old machines that most people would have thrown away. And what they're really saying, what they're doing, with their hands and their patience and their refusal to quit, is something ancient and completely human. I will not let what matters disappear without a fight. That's not a motorcycle philosophy, that's a life philosophy, and it might be the most important one there is. So here's what I want to ask you, and I mean this genuinely. Is there something in your life right now that's broken? Not destroyed, just broken? That you've been thinking about replacing instead of restoring? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one.